Lonesome Dove, Chapter 61. Augustus figured that 2 or 3 days' ride east would put them in the path of the herds, but on the second day the rain struck, making travel unpleasant. He cut Lorena a crude poncho out of a tarp he had picked up off the buffalo hunters' camp, but even so it was bad traveling. The rains were chill, and it looked like they might last, so he decided to risk adobe walls. The old fort offered the only promise of shelter. They got there to find the place entirely deserted, and most of the buildings in ruins. Not enough buffalo, Augustus said. It wasn't 2 years ago they had that big fight here, and now look at it. Looks like it's been empty 50 years. The only signs of life were the rattlesnakes, of which there were plenty, and mice, which explains the snakes. A few owls competed with the snakes for the mice. They found a room whose roof was more or less intact, and whose fireplace even worked once Augustus poked loose an owl's nest. He broke up the remains of an old wagon to make a fire. "This weather'll slow call up," Augustus said. "I expect they'll all think we're dead by now." Lorena still hadn't spoken. She found her silence hard to give up. It seemed her best weapon against the things that could happen. Talk didn't help when things were worst. No one was listening. If the Kiowas had done what they had wanted to do, she could have screamed her voice out and no one would have heard. Gus was perfectly patient with her silence. He didn't seem to mind it. He just went on talking as if they were having a conversation, talking of this and that. He didn't talk about what happened to her, but treated her as he always had in Lonesome Dove. Though she didn't talk, she couldn't stand to have Gus out of her sight. At night, she rolled in his blanket with him. It was only then that she felt warm. But if he stood up to do an errand, she watched him, and if the errand took him outside, she got up and went out too. The second day, the rain still poured. Gus poked around the fort to see if he could find anything useful, and came across a large box of buttons. "There was a woman here during the fight, I recollect," he said. "I guess she took off so fast she left her button box." There were all sizes of buttons. It gave Augustus an idea. He had a pack of cards in his saddlebags, which he quickly produced. "Let's play a few hands," he said. "The buttons can be our money." He spread a blanket near the fireplace and sorted the buttons into piles according to size. There were some large horn buttons that must have been meant for coats. "Them be our $50 gold pieces," he said. "These here will be the 10s, and these little ones can be 5s. This is a high-stakes game we're playing." "Don't you cheat, Gus," Lorena said suddenly. "If you cheat, I won't give you no pokes." Augustus was so pleased to hear her talk that tears came to his eyes. "We're just playing for buttons, honey," he said. For the first hand or two, Lorena made mistakes. She had forgotten what the cards meant. But it quickly came back to her, and she played avidly, even laughing once when she won a hand. But the playing soon tired her. It seemed anything tired her if she did it too long. And she still trembled at the least thing. When Gus saw she was tiring, he made a pallet for her by the fireplace and sat by her while she napped. Her bruises were healing. She was much thinner than she had been when Blue Duck took her away. Her cheeks had hollowed. Outside, the rain pelted the long prairies. The roof had a leak in one corner, and a little stream of water dripped down one wall. They stayed in the walls for 2 days, comfortably out of the wet. That first evening, by good luck, Augustus happened to see a deer grazing just outside the wagon yard. That night they had venison, and Lorena ate with a real appetite for the first time. "Eat like that, you'll soon be the most beautiful woman in Texas again," Augustus said. Lorena said nothing. That night she woke up crying and shaking. Augustus held her and crooned to her as if she were a child. But she didn't go back to sleep. She lay on her pallet, her eyes wide open. An hour or two before dawn, the rain stopped, as soon as the bright sun shone above the wet prairie. "I wish we could stay here," Lorena said, when she saw Gus making preparations to leave. "We might not last long if we did," Augustus said. "Every mangy renegade that's left loose knows about this place. If a bunch of them show up at once, we'd be in trouble." Lorena understood that, but she didn't want to go. Lying on the pallet and playing cards for buttons was fine, so as long as it was just Gus who was there. She didn't want to see other men, for any reason at all. She didn't want them to see her. There was a strong feeling within her that said she should stay hidden. She wanted Gus to hide her. "I don't want them," she said, looking at Gus. "You won't have to have them," Augustus said. "I'll see you're let be. But we can't stay here. Game's skimpy and there's no telling who'll come along." Lorena began to cry when she got to her horse. She could no longer control her tears. They were apt to come at any time, though, like talk, they did no good. Things happened, no matter how hard you cried. "Now, Lori, don't you fret no more than you have to," Augustus said. "We'll get over to where the cowboys are, and then we'll be fine. You'll get to San Francisco yet." Lorena had almost forgotten what San Francisco was. Then she remembered. A place with boats, where it was cool. It was where Jake had promised to take her. Jake had gone out of her mind so completely, while she was confused, that it was strange to think of him. It was like thinking of someone who had died. "Where is Jake?" she asked. "I don't know," Augustus said. "He wanted to come with me, but I didn't want to put up with the scamp." They rode until the afternoon, keeping close to the Canadian, which was high from the rains. Toward the evening, they stopped on top of a ridge and saw a surprising sight. 4 great herds of cattle spread as far as one can see across the plain. "The river stopped him," Augustus said. "They're all waiting for it to go down." The cowboys were still a mile or so away, but Lorena began to shake at the sight of them. They were just more men. "They won't hurt you, honey," Augustus said. "Likely they'll be more scared of you than you are of them. Most of them probably forgot what a woman looks like." Lorena fell back into her silence. She had nowhere else to go. As they approached the nearest herd, a man galloped out to meet them. "My Lord, it's the man from Yale College, the one who read that Latin on my sign," Augustus said. "I recognize the horse. It's that nice bay we stole back from old Pedro just before he died." Lorena didn't look at the man. Will Barger was as surprised as Augustus. He had seen 2 riders and supposed they were scouts from another herd. "By God, McCrae, you're a surprise," he said. "I thought you were 3 weeks behind me, and now here you are attacking from the west. How far back is your herd, or do you have one?" "As you can see, I ain't brought a cow," Augustus said. "Call may still have a herd of them if he ain't lost them or just turned them loose. If he would do that, he's a fool, and he didn't act like a fool," Will Barger said. "He wouldn't trade me that mare." He tipped his hat to Lorena. "I don't believe I've met the young lady," he said. "This is Miss Lorena Wood," Augustus said. "She's had the misfortune to be abducted. Now I've abducted her back. We're short of grub and would like to purchase some if you have any to spare." Will Barger glanced once more at Lorena, who sat with her head down. "I'm not such a scoundrel as to sell grub," he said. "You're welcome to come to camp and eat with my tough bunch if you can stand them." "I doubt we could," Augustus said quietly. "We're both shy." "Oh, I see," Will Barger said, glancing at Lorena again. "I'm damn glad you don't have a herd. You'd think there'd be room enough for everybody across these plains, but as you can see, the view is crowding up. I was going to try crossing today, but I've decided to wait until morning." He was silent a moment, considering the problem of their shyness. "We're about to eat," he said. "It's a free country, so my advice to you would be go make a camp somewhere you choose. I'll borrow a pot from our cook and bring you some grub once you get settled." "I'm much obliged," Augustus said. "Notice any tree in these parts?" "No, sir," Will Barger said. "If there was a tree in these parts, I'd be sitting under it." They made a camp on the plain. Will Barger was as good as his word. In an hour he returned with a small pack mule. Besides an ample pot of beefsteak and beans, he brought a small tent. "I scarcely use this tent," Will Barger said, dropping it by their campfire. "You're welcome to borrow it. The young lady might like some privacy." "I guess it's your training in Latin that gives you such good manners," Augustus remarked. The sky's unpredictable, and we would enjoy a tent. I also brought a bottle, Will Barger said. I seem to remember you're a drinking man. As soon as the tent went up, Lorena went in. Gus spread her pallet, and she sat where she could watch him through the open flap. The men sat outside and drank. Had an easy trip? Augustus asked. No, sir, Will Barger said. My foreman died, south of Fort Worth. I have another herd somewhere ahead of me, but I can't leave to go check on it. I don't know that I'll ever see it again, although I may. What'd he die of? Augustus asked. It's a healthy climate down that way. He died of a horse falling backward over him, Will Barger said. He would test the broncs. Foolish, Augustus said. A grown man ought to have sense enough to seek gentle horses. Many don't, Will Barger pointed out. That mare Captain Call wouldn't trade me didn't look that gentle, yet he was a grown man. Grown, but not what you'd call normal, Augustus said. I put it back down to a lack of education. If he'd been trained in Latin, he'd most likely have let you have that horse. Do you consider yourself normal then? Will Barger asked. Certainly, Augustus said. I never met a soul in this world as normal as me. And yet you sit here, far out on the naked plain, with a shy woman you had to rescue, Will Barger pointed out. How many skunks did you have to kill in order to rescue her? A passel, Augustus said. I got the peons, but the Hefe got away, a bandit named Blue Duck, who I'd advise you to give a wide berth unless you're skilled in battle. You think he's around? I've heard of the scamp. No, I think he's headed to the Purgatory River, Augustus said. But then I underestimated him once, which is why the lady got abducted. I'm out of practice when it comes to figuring out bandits. She's a little peaked, that girl, Will Barger said. You ought to take her back to Fort Worth. There's not much in the way of accommodations or medical care north of here. We'll ease along, Augustus said. Where shall I return this tent? I've got business in Denver later in the year, Will Barger said. That's if I live, of course. Send it over to Denver if you have a chance. I don't use this darn thing much, but I might next winter if I'm still out where it's windy. I'm enjoying this whiskey, Augustus said. A man is foolish enough to give up the stable pleasure of life just to follow a bunch of shitting cattle. You have a point, and it's a point I've often taxed myself with, Will Barger said. If you're such a normal boy, then how come you done it? Unfinished business in Ogallala, Nebraska, Augustus said. I'd hate to grow old without finishing it. I see, Will Barger said. Another shy lady who must have got abducted. They drank until the bottle was empty. If you had two, I wish you brought two, Augustus said. I need to get back in practice drinking. Well, if we don't get across that damn river tomorrow, I'll see if I can rustle up another one, Will Barger said, standing up. I seldom get conversation like yours. I can't figure out if I like it or not, but I will admit it's conversation, which is far more than can be had in my camp. He mounted his horse and was about to ride away. I'll send over the cook with some breakfast, he said. By the way, you didn't cross paths with a young sheriff from Arkansas, did you? He's up this way somewhere, and I've been worried about him. You must be referring to July Johnson, Augustus said. We left him 4 days ago. He was headed north. Well, he had a funny crew with him. I was just a little uneasy, Wahlberger said. I found him to be a likable man, but inexperienced. He's got more experience now, Augustus said. Blue Duck killed his crew. Killed all 3 of them? Will Barger asked, startled. I even offered the young boy a job. He should have took it, Augustus said. We buried them west of here. That duck must be a hard son of a bitch, Will Barger said. He sat on his horse a moment, looking into the night. I had a feeling young Johnson was inexperienced, he said, and trotted off. The next morning, Will Barger's old cook came over with some breakfast. It was a fine morning. The sun was up and the plains well dried out. Augustus stepped out of the tent, but Lorena was content to look through the flaps. This is like living in a hotel, Lori, Augustus said. We got people toting us meals as fast as we can eat them. At that point, the cook got careless, and the little pack mule took a kick at him, which barely missed. He's getting tired of making this trip, the cook said. Or it could just be the company he's tired of, Augustus suggested. I'd buy him if he was for sale. I've always got along with mules. This mule ain't for sale, the cook said, looking over at the camp. I wished all I had to do was live in a tent. Without further ado, he turned and went back. When he was gone, Lorena came out and sat in the bright sun. While they ate, Barger's cowboys began to move the herd across the river. That Will Barger's a curious man, Augustus said. He's blunt-spoken, but I guess he'll do. Before noon, all the herds had crossed, and the wagons and the remuda of the last one was just moving out of sight to the north. We might as well cross while the crossing's good, Augustus said. It could come another rain. He folded the tent, which was awkward to carry on a horse. His horse didn't like it and tried to pitch, but Augustus finally got him settled down. The river had gone down some, and they crossed without difficulty and made camp along the ridge about 2 miles north of it. Now then, we ought to be set, Augustus said, once he had set the tent secure. I imagine the boys will be along in a week or so. Lorena didn't care if they never came along. She was glad they had the tent. It was scarcely up before the rain clouds boiled again out of the northwest. Let it rain. We're ready, Augustus said, taking the box of buttons from his saddlebag. I guess it won't stop us from playing cards. Will Barger had thoughtfully left them some coffee and a side of bacon, and with those provisions and the tent and the buttons, they passed a week. A little of the hollowness left Lorena's cheeks, and her bruises healed. She still slept close to Augustus at night, and her eyes still followed him whenever he went to move the horses or do some errand. Once or twice on the pretty evenings they rode over to the river. August had rigged a fishing line out of some coarse thread they had found in adobe walls. He bent a needle for a hook and used tadpoles for bait, but he caught no fish. Whenever he went to the river, he stripped off and bathed. Come in, Lori, he said several times. A bath won't hurt you. Finally she did. She had not washed in a long time, and it felt good. Gus was sitting on a rock not far away, letting the sun dry him. The water was rapid, so she didn't wade too far in. She was surprised to see how white her skin looked, once the dirt was all washed off. The sight of her own brown legs and white belly surprised her so that she began to cry. Once the crying started, she couldn't stop. She cried as if she would never stop. Gus noticed and walked over to help her out of the river, for she was just standing there sobbing, the water up to her thighs. Gus didn't reprimand her. I suspect the best thing for you to do is cry it out, Lori, he said. You just remember you got a long time to live. They shouldn't have taken me, Lorena said when she stopped crying. She got her a rag of a dress and went back to the tent.